Welcome to another episode of Sounds Reasonable. I am your host, Dr. Brad, and I am joined in the production of our weekly show by Tim and Tracy. We're all members of the Free Thought community, and our Sounds Reasonable website can be found on Facebook. Do you experience frequent irrational thoughts, a pervasive belief in a divine sky daddy, an insatiable urge to read horoscopes, perform spells, speak in tongues, or pray? Fortunately, you are now listening to the cure for these ailments. Sounds Reasonable. This show is dedicated to bringing you, the listener, the latest news in free thought, science, logic and reason, and politics and religion. And of course, we encourage you to share your thoughts with us after each episode by posting comments and asking questions on our Facebook page. What is free thought? What does it mean to be a free thinker? The dictionary definition is a person who forms opinions about religion based on reason, independent of tradition, authority, or established belief. Here's Christopher Hitchens' working definition. Our belief is not a belief. Our principles are not a faith. We do not rely solely upon science and reason because these are necessary rather than sufficient factors, but we distrust anything that contradicts science or outrages reason. We may differ on many things, but what we respect is free inquiry, open-mindedness, and the pursuit of ideas for their own sake. We'll now move on to our science news segment. And remember that the scientific mind is one that allows its perceptions of reality to be constrained by good evidence and good argument. Bradykinin is a peptide that promotes inflammation. It causes arterioles to dilate, that is, enlarge, via the release of prostacyclin, nitric oxide, and endothelial-derived hyperpolarizing factor, and makes veins contract by a prostaglandin F2, thereby leading to leakage into capillary beds due to increased pressure in the capillaries. Bradykinin is a physiologically and pharmacologically active peptide of the kinin group of proteins and consists of only 9 amino acids. Now, the story I'm going to relate today comes from Medium Elemental and was authored by Thomas Smith and published on September 1st of this year. The title of the article is, A Supercomputer Analyzed COVID-19 and an Interesting New Theory Has Emerged. Earlier this summer, the Summit supercomputer at Oak Ridge National Lab in Tennessee set about crunching data on more than 40,000 genes from 17,000 genetic samples in an effort to better understand COVID-19. Summit is the second fastest supercomputer in the world, but the process, which involved analyzing 2.5 billion genetic combinations, still took more than a week. Now, I sat down and tried that, and I got to about 2,500 in a week. So it goes just a little faster than we can. When Summit was done, researchers analyzed the results. It was, in the words of Dr. Daniel Jacobson, lead researcher and chief scientist for computational systems biology at Oak Ridge, a eureka moment. The computer had revealed a new theory about how COVID-19 impacts the body, the Bradykinin hypothesis, and I've got that as my virtual background today, but we'll be showing this figure and I'll be describing it here in a little bit. The hypothesis provides a model that explains many aspects of COVID-19, including some of its most bizarre symptoms. It also suggests 10 plus potential treatments, many of which are already FDA approved. And of course, that's huge right there. We're not going to have any time lag per se in approving new drugs. The drugs are already in use for other purposes. Jacobson's group published their results in a paper in the journal eLife in early July. Now, according to the team's findings, a COVID-19 infection generally begins when the virus enters the body through ACE2 receptors in the nose. The receptors, which the virus is known to target, are abundant there. The virus then proceeds through the body, entering cells in other places where ACE2 is also present. For example, the intestines, the kidneys, the heart. This likely accounts for at least some of the disease's cardiac and GI symptoms. But once COVID-19 has established itself in the body, things start to get interesting. According to Jacobson's group, the data Summit analyzed shows that COVID-19 is not content to simply infect cells that already express lots of ACE2 receptors. Instead, it actively hijacks the body's own systems, tricking it into upregulating ACE2 receptors in places where they're usually expressed at low or medium levels, including the lungs. In this sense, COVID-19 is like a burglar who slips in your unlocked second floor window and starts to ransack your house. Once inside, though, they do not just take your stuff. They also throw open all your doors and windows so their accomplices can rush in and help pillage more efficiently. Now, the renin-angiotensin system, or RAS, controls many aspects of the circulatory system, including the body's levels of a chemical called bradykinin, which normally helps to regulate blood pressure. According to the team's analysis, when the virus tweaks the RAS, it causes the body's mechanism for regulating bradykinin to go haywire. Bradykinin receptors are resensitized, and the body also stops effectively breaking down bradykinin. So ACE normally degrades bradykinin, but when the virus downregulates it, it cannot do this as effectively. The result, the researchers say, is to release a bradykinin storm, a massive runaway buildup of bradykinin in the body. According to the bradykinin hypothesis, it's this storm that is ultimately responsible for many of COVID-19's deadly effects. Jacobson's team says in their paper that the pathology of COVID-19 is likely the result of bradykinin storms rather than cytokine storms, which had been previously identified in COVID-19 patients, but that the two may be intricately linked. Other papers had previously identified bradykinin storms as a possible cause of COVID-19's pathologies. As bradykinin builds up in the body, it dramatically increases vascular permeability. In short, it makes your blood vessels very leaky. This aligns with recent clinical data, which increasingly views COVID-19 primarily as a vascular disease rather than the respiratory one. But COVID-19 still has a massive effect on the lungs. As blood vessels start to leak due to a bradykinin storm, the researchers say, the lungs can fill with fluid. Immune cells leak out into the lungs, Jacobson's team found, causing the inflammation in the lungs. So, Tim, if I could go ahead and have that figure, please.
You bet.
Okay, so on the left, we have the normal condition of the capillaries. So note that we've got a very low level of permeability. There's a relatively small space between the cells that make up the capillary wall. However, in the presence of high levels of bradykinin, now the space between the epithelial cells that make up the wall of the capillaries, the gap between those cells enlarges rather significantly, allowing fluid and cells to leak out into the underlying tissues. Now, of course, when we get fluid buildup like this in the lungs, what do we call that? Well, we call it pneumonia, right? Hence the viral pneumonia that we're associating with COVID-19 infection. Okay, so we can go back to regular screen, Tim. Thank you. And COVID-19 has another especially insidious trick. Through another pathway, the team's data shows, it increases production of high hyaluronic acid in the lungs. Now, high hyaluronic acid is often used in soaps and lotions for its ability to absorb more than 1,000 times its weight in fluid. Now, when it combines with fluid leaking into the lungs, the results are disastrous. It forms a hydrogel, which can fill the lungs in some patients. According to Jacobson, once this happens, it's like trying to breathe through jello. So this may explain why ventilators have proven less effective in treating advanced COVID-19 than doctors originally expected based on experience with other viruses. It reaches a point where regardless of how much oxygen you pump in, it doesn't matter because the alveoli in the lungs are filled with this hydrogel. The lungs become like a water balloon. Patients can suffocate even while receiving full breathing support. The Bradykinin hypothesis also extends to many of COVID-19's effects on the heart. About 1 in 5 hospitalized COVID-19 patients have damage to their hearts, even if they never have had cardiac issues before. Some of this is likely due to the virus infecting the heart directly through its ACE2 receptors, but the RAS also controls aspects of cardiac contractions and blood pressure. According to the researchers, bradykinin storms could create arrhythmias and low blood pressure, which are often seen in COVID-19 patients. The bradykinin hypothesis also accounts for COVID-19's neurological effects, which are some of the most surprising and concerning elements of the disease. These symptoms, which include dizziness, seizures, delirium, and stroke, are present in as many as half of hospitalized COVID-19 patients. According to Jacobson and his team, MRI studies in France revealed that many COVID-19 patients have evidence of leaky blood vessels in their brains. Bradykinin, especially at high doses, can also lead to a breakdown of the blood-brain barrier. Under normal circumstances, this barrier acts as a filter between your brain and the rest of your circulatory system. It lets in the nutrients and small molecules that the brain needs to function, while keeping out toxins and pathogens and keeping the brain's internal environment tightly regulated. If bradykinin storms cause the blood-brain barrier to break down, this could allow harmful cells and compounds into the brain, leading to inflammation, potential brain damage, and many of the neurological symptoms COVID-19 patients experience, Jacobson told me. It's a reasonable hypothesis that many of the neurological symptoms in COVID-19 could be due to an excess of bradykinin. It's been reported that bradykinin would indeed be likely to increase the permeability of the blood-brain barrier. In addition, similar neurological symptoms have been observed in other diseases that result from an excess of bradykinin. Now, just as a quick side note, of the few people that I personally know that have had COVID-19, fortunately, none of them had really bad symptoms. But the one symptom they all had in common was an intense headache that lasted for 2 to 3 days. And if your blood pressure gets dysregulated and you get some pressure on on the brain, that fits, right? It fits with having symptoms like that. Now, increased bradykinin levels could also account for other common COVID-19 symptoms. ACE inhibitors, a class of drugs used to treat high blood pressure, have a similar effect on the RAS system as COVID-19, increasing bradykinin levels. In fact, Jacobson and his team note in their paper that the virus acts pharmacologically as an ACE inhibitor, almost directly mirroring the action of these drugs. By acting like a natural ACE inhibitor, COVID-19 may be causing the same effects that hypertensive patients sometimes get when they take blood pressure lowering drugs. ACE inhibitors are known to cause a dry cough, again, very common symptom of this disease, and fatigue, two textbook symptoms of COVID-19. And they can potentially increase blood potassium levels, which has also been observed in COVID-19 patients. The similarities between ACE inhibitor side effects and COVID-19 symptoms strengthen the bradykinin hypothesis. ACE inhibitors are also known to cause a loss of taste and smell. Jacobson stresses, though, that this symptom is more likely due to the virus affecting the cells surrounding olfactory nerves than the direct effects of bradykinin. Though still an emerging theory, the bradykinin hypothesis explains several other of COVID-19's similar, seemingly bizarre symptoms. Jacobson and his team speculate that leaky vasculature caused by bradykinin storms could be responsible for COVID toes, a condition involving swollen, bruised toes that some COVID-19 patients experience. Bradykinin can also mess with the thyroid gland, which could produce the thyroid symptoms recently observed in some patients. The bradykinin hypothesis can also explain some of the broader demographic patterns of the disease's spread. The researchers note that some of the RAS system, some aspects of the RAS system are sex-linked, with proteins for several receptors located on the X chromosome. This means that women would have twice the levels of this protein than men, a result borne out by the researchers' data. In their paper, Jacobson's team concludes that this could explain the lower incidence of COVID-19 induced mortality in women. A genetic quirk of the RAS could be giving women extra protection against the disease. The bradykinin hypothesis provides a model that contributes to a better understanding of COVID-19 and adds novelty to the existing literature, according to scientists Frank Vanderburg and Vandermeer and Roger Little, who peer-reviewed the team's paper. It predicts nearly all the disease's symptoms, even ones like bruises on the toes that at first appear random and further suggest new treatments for the disease. As Jacobson and team point out, several drugs target aspects of the RAS and are already FDA approved to treat other conditions. They could arguably be applied to treating COVID-19 as well. Several, like danazol, stanozol, and acalantide, reduce bradykinin production and could potentially stop a deadly bradykinin storm. Others, like icatibant, reduce bradykinin signaling and could blunt its effects once it's already in the body. Interestingly, Jacobson's team also suggests vitamin D as a potentially useful COVID-19 drug. The vitamin is involved in the RAS system and could prove helpful by reducing levels of another compound known as REN. Again, this could stop potentially deadly bradykinin storms from forming. The researchers note that vitamin D has already been shown to help those with COVID-19. The vitamin is readily available over the counter, and around 20% of the population is deficient. If indeed the vitamin proves effective at reducing the severity of bradykinin storms, it could be an easy, relatively safe way to reduce the severity of the virus. Other compounds could treat symptoms associated with bradykinin storms. Hymochromone, for example, could reduce hyaluronic acid levels, potentially stopping deadly hydrogels from forming in the lungs. And timvastatin could mimic the mechanism that the researchers believe protects women from more severe COVID-19 infections. All these potential treatments are speculative, of course, and would need to be studied in a rigorous, controlled environment before their effectiveness could be determined and they could be used more broadly. I really want to emphasize that for our listeners. So don't just run out and start taking huge quantities of vitamin D, for example, or if you happen to have a relative that uses one of these drugs, don't go begging them for it. Realize that these are hypothetical treatments at the moment and need to be performed in rigorous clinical studies. Now, COVID-19 stands out for both the scale of its global impact and apparent randomness of its many symptoms. Physicians have struggled to understand the disease and come up with a unified theory for how it works. Though yet unproven, the Bradykinin hypothesis provides such a theory. And like all good hypotheses, it also provides specific, testable predictions. In this case, actual drugs that could provide relief to real patients. Now again, the researchers are quick to point out that testing of any of these pharmaceutical interventions should be done in well-designed clinical studies. As to the next step in the process, Jacobson is clear. We have to get this message out. His team's finding will not cure COVID-19, but if the treatments it points to pan out in the clinic, interventions guided by the Bradykinin hypothesis could greatly reduce patient suffering and potentially save lives. So, what do you think? Is Bradykinin going to be the key pathophysiological point to intervene in this disease?
Sounds like maybe.
Yeah, it sure looks like an extremely strong candidate for explaining all of those symptoms. That's just fascinating what they were able to do with that, the analysis of the data and what the supercomputer, basically came up with is. I think it's really amazing.
I'd like to know what type of algorithm was able to be put together to decipher all of that data.
Yeah,
that's
right.
A huge amount of data.
Yeah, it's just fascinating. And again, as we talked about in an earlier article with the cytokine storm, how we talked about with the melatonin type aspect, and there probably, like I say, I wouldn't be surprised there is still some aspect of that's involved. But then now you throw in the Bradykinin and it just explains so many of those symptoms.
Right. If we were in court, I think we'd have rather overwhelming circumstantial evidence.
You had said something about does all of this starting in the nose, and you've seen all the people wearing their masks under their nose, right? I even saw a woman the other day it was a mask that was made to go under the nose.
Oh boy.
Why?
Yeah, go ahead, Tracy. But I was just going to say, I was thinking about that, Brad, and I'd forgotten, when you pointed that out, I said, I'd forgotten, well, that's right. And again, you see all these people, they'll have a mask, but let it slide down for their nose.
Right.
Worse, it'd be better.
Is that way more? Yeah.
And leave your mouth open. Almost
right. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what gets inside people's heads other than, in that case, COVID-19.
Well, and I can understand, it's that fact is not known. I don't think it hasn't been or understood, that fact that the nasal entry is where you're most susceptible.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the public has not been told, or they just don't understand that fact. And again, I'd even forgotten about it till you'd mentioned that was the primary portal of entry, nasal receptors. So
sure. So
yeah,
it's it's similar to the common cold in terms of its transmission. So I mean, you would think that people would
Felt like
understand that that's going to be the primary route.
so like wearing a seatbelt but putting the shoulder thing behind you. You know, like just wearing it.
Well, it's more like putting the shoulder thing around your neck, so that when you do have the accident,
Wrap it around like this.
yeah, that's what it's more like.
That probably is a little more accurate. Yeah, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I wish, I wish we had more public service lectures. But of course, how do you do it? Well, you have to have people come to your lecture.
Right, and you have to have, and like I guess can kind of tie to my story. You have to have people in power that direct that and are on board with that and are backing science.
You can lead a horse to a mask, but you can't make it wear it correctly.
And there you go.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's pretty good.
I've heard that.
But yeah, so it looks like they're really onto something here, and let's hope that we hear about some successful clinical trials now based on the Bradykinin hypothesis.
Sure.
Very promising.
Okay, well, I think we'll go ahead and take our first break. So we'll be back with more Sounds Reasonable after this.
Everything that brought me alive. Oh, we're all like monsters, playing with the monsters. They brought me alive, but got no alibi. It's a lover's fight without an alibi. Took my hands without an alibi.
And we're back with more Sounds Reasonable on September 13th, 2020. Fraud, lies, deceit, all terms that have become synonymous with our modern day politicians, unfortunately, and probably not just modern day for that matter, ever since politics was invented, probably. However, allowing the people whom you govern and were sworn to protect to die by the hundreds of thousands because you have engaged in the deliberate hiding and distortion of the truth is unforgivable. Tim has this outrageous story for us. So Tim, what has the liar in chief done now?
Well, thanks, Dr. Brad. Yeah, this is just amazing. So my story this week comes from the HuffPost on September 9th, and it's titled, Trump Admits He Lied About COVID-19 Threat in New Woodward Book. So it's come to light in taped interviews from Bob Woodward, yes, the Bob Woodward of Watergate fame, revealing that President Donald Trump knew in early February that the coronavirus posed a unique and deadly threat to the United States. And he was, quote, and was, quote, more deadly than even your strenuous flus. What's so disturbing is that at the time, Trump publicly was downplaying the virus as no more dangerous than the flu. President Trump granted Woodward a series of interviews for his upcoming book, Rage. In the interviews, one of the many things that Trump talked about was COVID-19. To quote, "You just breathe the air and that's how it's passed," Trump said in February 7th call with Woodward. Further, quote, "And so it's a very tricky one. That's a very delicate one. It's also more deadly than even your strenuous flu. This is deadly stuff," he repeated. According to Woodward's book obtained by CNN, on March 19th, Trump told Woodward, quote, "I wanted to always play it down. I still like playing it down because I don't want to create a panic," unquote. But of course, as we all know by now, by not informing the public about what was known about the virus at the time, the president didn't prevent, he provoked mass hysteria, I guess you might say. Many statements Trump made as the virus spread in the US were outright falsehoods. So here's some examples, and it's ones you've heard. "We have it very much under control in this country. It's going to be just fine. It's one person coming from China. We're doing a great job with it. It's going to have a very good ending for us. We're in great shape. We have 12 cases, 11 cases, and many of them are in good shape. Just stay calm. It'll go away." And again, when you have 15 people, and the 15 within a couple of days is going to be down to close to zero. It's going to disappear. One day, it's like a miracle. It will disappear. Okay. Again, we've heard these, right? Now, responding to the release of what Trump knew, White House Press Secretary McEnany was quoted as saying, "Trump has never lied to the American public on COVID, and he never downplayed the virus," unquote. And not surprising, Republican lawmakers had mixed reactions. For example, Mitt Romney, when asked about Trump's admission in Woodward's book that he downplayed the coronavirus by reporters on Capitol Hill, he was asked by reporters on Capitol Hill this, and he, quote, said, "It doesn't sound ideal to me," unquote, which I guess you could say is a condemnation of the president, I guess, maybe as much as a Republican would condemn him. And then in contrast, you have the Trump ass kicker, Lindsey Graham, ass kisser, excuse me. Maybe he's not an ass kicker, he's an ass licker of Trump. Senator.
I wish he was an ass kicker.
Well, yeah.
We need more ass kickers and less ass kissers.
yeah, we do. Lindsey Graham was
Kisser, kicker.
Yes. Lindsey Graham was quoted saying, "I don't think he needs to be on TV screaming, 'We're all gonna die.' His actions shutting down the economy were the right actions." So Trump repeatedly resisted calls to shut down businesses in order to save lives. In March, he claimed that the U.S. would see more deaths from an economic shutdown from the coronavirus. Separately, emails obtained by Politico showed that the Trump administration has tried to muzzle Anthony Fauci, the government's top infectious disease expert, and encouraged him to minimize the risk that the coronavirus poses to children. Fauci told the outlet that nobody tells him what to say and that he, quote, speaks on science evidence. Good for him. According to the Washington Post, Woodward's book is based in part on 18 of the recorded interviews with Trump from December through July. Woodward also interviewed Defense Secretary Jim Mathis and former National Intelligence Director Daniel Coates. In addition to documenting the Trump administration's failed and fragmented coronavirus response, the book also chronicles Trump's response to anti-racism demonstrations North Korea, diplomacy, and other topics. Now, in another post, another HuffPost article released on September 9th as well, written by the AP, titled "Bob Woodward Defends Without Withholding Trump's Coronavirus Comments for Months." The article discusses the widespread criticism that Bob Woodward has had for not revealing President Trump's early concerns about the severity of the coronavirus. And Woodward told the Associated Press that he needed time to be sure that Trump's private comments from February were accurate. Quote, "He tells me this and I'm thinking, wow, that's interesting, but is it true? Trump says things that don't check out, right?" Unquote. So Woodward told the AP during a telephone interview, they told this during a telephone interview with the AP. And then using a famous phrase from the Watergate era, when Woodward's reporting of the Post helped lead to President Richard Nixon's resignation, Woodward said that his mission was to determine, quote, "what did he know and when did he know it?" During his AP interview, Woodward said Trump called him out of the blue in early February to, quote, "unburden himself about the virus," which then had a few cases in the U.S. But Woodward said that only in May was he satisfied that Trump's comments were based on reliable information and that by then the virus had spread nationwide. Quote, if I had done the story at the time about what he knew in February, that's not telling us anything we didn't know, unquote, Woodward said. At that point, he said the issue was no longer one of public health, but of politics. His priority became getting the story out before the election in November. Quote, "That was the demarcation line for me," he said. Quote, "had I decided that my book was coming out on Christmas, the end of this year, that would have been unthinkable." Asked why he didn't share Trump's February remarks with fellow Post reporter to pursue it, Woodward said he had developed, quote, "some pretty important sources of his own," quote, "couldn't have brought others in. Could they have done things I couldn't do?" He asked. "I was on the trail and I was still on the trail when the virus exploded." So Dr. Brad and Tracy, what are your thoughts about this?
Where do you begin? What I'm hoping, I was watching an episode of Morning Joe last week, and Joe was talking about his father, and he said his father was a staunch Nixon supporter, and his father did not believe anything that the newspapers were printing about Nixon concerning Watergate until the Supreme Court demanded that Nixon release the tapes. And then Joe's father had to admit that Nixon had indeed done those things and was guilty and should be removed from office. So what I'm hoping happens is a wake-up moment for about 4 to 5% of Trump supporters, because there's, as we all know, there's a 33% that will never leave him.
Right.
So that leaves about a 7% gap between them and who supports him now. So if we can manage to carve half of those away, we'll at least be rid of him in November. So that's my take on it. That's what I'm hoping results from all this.
Well, what I foresee too is maybe the outrage that independents and fellow Democrats, fellow progressives, that'll again spur them on to get out to vote too, because that's really important. Is that because it's true, he has that base that's not wavering, and so it's almost up to us independents, progressives, free thinkers to make sure that we get out to vote and to get this piece of shit out of office.
That is absolutely true. And we've always known that Trump has blood on his hands anyway. And I think that Woodward should have gone public earlier, because a journalist can report what someone said. I mean, Trump said it. He can report that he said it, and it's not his fault. It's not Woodward's fault. It wouldn't have been Woodward's fault if it weren't true. He's just reporting what he said.
That's a good point, Tracy. It would have spawned a lot of investigation.
And it's such an important subject. It's for him to just not tell anybody about it, and it be such a big deal. I mean, I would rather have incorrect information out there that Trump said and it turn out to be incorrect than not have that out there and it turn out to be correct, which is what happens. 192,000 deaths later, here we are. What is that? At least manslaughter. 192.
I equate it to a criminally negligent homicide. 100 where Trump should be charged with 192,000 counts of criminally negligent homicide so far.
Right.
So far, exactly. So far.
And that's an excellent point. That and so I guess it makes you think in the back of your mind that maybe Bob didn't want to release that because he wanted to get that book.
Do we know how long it took him to do all 18 interviews? Because remember, there were 18 different times,
right,
that they had conversations.
I think, there's I think I said, but now I go back and see if I see that.
But
Yeah,
I guess I don't recall you saying it.
Maybe I did. Yeah.
But shoot. I guess I don't know when the first one was and when the last one wrapped up.
Here it is. 18 of the recorded interviews with Trump from December through July.
Okay, so in essence, he had a solid month to put things together from those 18 interviews. So that's not quite as bad as we might first perceive it to be. That he was slow getting information out. It was really about a month and a half or so once he finished his interviews.
Yeah.
So
I
that makes me feel a little better, actually.
You're right. I didn't think about that way. You're right. So again, hearing these things, and then during that time period, and I guess I can understand where he would he's got 20,000 lies and falsehoods, and I can't believe everything that comes out of his mouth. So I can see where
that's true. You can't believe everything that comes out of his mouth, but you can quote him.
That's true. And I guess, call him on it, which we don't do, or it's not done enough when he does.
You can quote him and fact check him later.
Okay.
I mean, every time that press secretary of his comes out, I immediately think of the song "Dirty Laundry."
Oh, I love that song.
The bubble-headed bleach blonde comes on at 5, ready to tell you about the plane crash with a gleam in her eye.
Exactly.
So that's where we are in terms of getting public information from.
True.
Oh. Well, Tim, gosh, thanks so much for that story. It seems that the bad news that comes out of the White House is just unending, and all we can do is vote the bums out. So We have 51 days to go. People get registered. 51 days to go.
21 days.
Yeah, get out and vote. Get
out and vote, or get that ballot sent in plenty early.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, we'll be back with more Sounds Reasonable after this short break.
Messing with my head again. You had your heart set on me, but these feels, they come and go, and they come so easily. Tell me what it is about you that I can't forget, but you're breaking down my walls again just to set me free. Why do I, baby, why do I love the way you are, we always leave me? Why do I, baby, why do I love the touch but never love the feeling? Why do I, baby, why do I love the way you are, we always leave me? Why do I, baby, why do I love the touch but never love the feeling?
And we're back with more Sounds Reasonable. The far-right conspiracy called QAnon becomes scarier the more you learn about it. This will be our third episode of 4 covering various aspects of QAnon. And Tracy, please continue this fascinating and frightening story with part 3.
Sure thing. As you said, it's part 3, and just a quick review, a definition of QAnon, or what we're talking about here, in case you missed a couple weeks ago. QAnon is a far-right conspiracy theory alleging that a cabal of Satan-worshipping pedophiles running a global child sex trafficking ring is plotting against President Donald Trump, who is battling them, leading to a day of reckoning involving the mass arrest of journalists and politicians. What I want to do for this section of the series is go back to July 3rd, 2019. And this shows to, further qualify the crazy, well, maybe not qualify the crazy, describe the crazy, I guess, but also show how QAnon members, when they have a conspiracy theory and there's a date involved, and then the thing that they think is going to happen doesn't happen, they just pretend that, they just carry on. They don't ever go, oh, well, that didn't happen. Maybe those conspiracies aren't right. They just keep on keeping on. This article is from the Rolling Stone, July 3rd, 2019. QAnon followers think JFK Jr. is coming back on the 4th of July. He's an avid Trump supporter and has been hiding in Pennsylvania for 2 decades, according to some people on Twitter who don't seem to realize he's actually dead. Consider, if you will, a sliding scale of celebrities. On one end of this spectrum are those who are still alive, including technical difficulties. It's refreshing, I'm sorry. Consider, if you will, a sliding scale of celebrities. On one end of the spectrum are those who are still alive, including but not limited to Jennifer Aniston, Justin Bieber, 9/10 of the original cast of Beverly Hills 90210. You remember Brenda Kelly, all those good-looking guys. Brandon. I don't know. Maybe I used to watch that. Oh my gosh, my story won't load. Okay. On the other end are those who are dead, including but not limited to Elvis Presley, John Belushi, and arguably Tupac. On this scientific scale, John F. Kennedy Jr. falls somewhere in between Judy Garland and former Minnesota Twins center fielder Kirby Puckett. All of which is to say he is extremely, irrefutably dead. Guys, this isn't working out for me.
So maybe I can do it this way, Tracy. So why do they has anyone put forward why they think JFK Jr. is still alive?
They think he's been hiding in Pennsylvania for 2 decades.
One would think he might find a better spot.
I know. The weather's nice there, right? Anyway, I can't do it. Oh, maybe I could. Hang on. Do 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 do.
Talk about
Do, 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 do. Do, 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 do.
Have there been any public sightings of him in Pennsylvania?
Oh, maybe they may have seen him. Maybe like people who look like him.
Right.
We see Elvis all the time.
Well, yeah. Well, and of course, and Brad, you probably remember the National Enquirer. You know, there'd be all these stories, the pictures seeing where JFK was still alive, and I remember seeing one where they had this person in a wheelchair, and it looked like it's supposed to be Jackie Kennedy, you know, pushing him along in the wheelchair, and had the head bandage, you know. So all those theories, and of course, same time they had, you know, Hitler was still alive too, and that the National Enquirer, right? That was what they did. Come up with all those.
Elvis really is alive, though, right?
Of course, and Tupac. You're right.
Tupac.
Yeah.
They're all together in the same hideout.
Same hideout.
In Pennsylvania.
All right, because I am a problem solver. Okay, I'm gonna start back right. On this scientific scale, John F. Kennedy Jr. falls somewhere in between Judy Garland and former Minnesota Twins center fielder Kirby Puckett, all of which is to say he is extremely irrefutably dead. In July 1999, the pulchritudinous son of John and Jackie Kennedy and co-founder of George Magazine perished in a tragic plane crash at the age of 38. Along with his wife, Carolyn Bessette, and his sister-in-law, Lauren. At least, this is the conventional narrative perpetuated by the fake news media, according to the supporters of pro-Trump conspiracy theory QAnon. Hardcore Q believers think that JFK Jr. is not only alive and well, but also that he plans to emerge from his 20-year hiatus from public life by coming out and supporting Trump as his running mate in 2020.
You better hurry up.
Moreover, they believe that a guy in Pittsburgh named Vincent Fuchsia is actually JFK Jr. in disguise, and they have made t-shirts promoting this belief. Seriously, you can buy them on Amazon. The The theory that JFK Jr. is alive and a Trump supporter and a hirsute former financial services professional who lives in Pittsburgh has been percolating in QAnon forums for at least the past year. Remember, this is 2019, but it recently made a resurgence on YouTube, where QAnon supporters are posting tutorials for how to make JFK Jr. face masks to wear to Trump's much hyped, I think would be like to look like JFK Jr. when they believe JFK Jr. will finally emerge from hiding. The goal of the mask, according to Daily Beast reporter Will Sommer, is for believers to be able to easily identify other QAnon supporters. Though frankly, this seems unlikely, as the shock of seeing a long-dead celebrity casually walking around Washington would almost certainly inspire mass fear and panic in the streets. So what exactly is the basis for this theory, and where did it come from? Why exactly do QAnon believers ardently cling to the idea that John is alive and well and living in Pittsburgh? And did Vincent Fuchsia have sex with Daryl Hannah in the 1980s? These are just a few important questions we must answer. I don't really know where that came from. So what is exactly? QAnon is an elaborate conspiracy theory suggesting that an anonymous poster known as Q, so named because of the supposed high level of security clearance in the U.S. government, has been posting messages since the fall 2017. Oh my gosh, my internet connection. Anyway, we covered that. How did JFK Jr. become involved? The theory that Kennedy was alive and running Q arose in June 2018 after the anonymous poster behind Q briefly went dark. Another anonymous poster, R, showed up on the QAnon forums on the website 8chan and started dropping hints that JFK Jr. had faked his death to avoid being targeted by members of the deep state conspiracy and was actually Q. The idea gained further credence thanks to Liz Crokin, a right-wing conspiracy theorist who referred to JFK Jr.'s role as Q during a 2018 interview with vlogger Jenny Moonstone. In the video, Crokin cited Q's post about former President John F. Kennedy as evidence that JFK Jr. was running the account. The way that Q talks about JFK Sr. in the post, it is with such love and passion, it makes me think that it is someone that is close to him, Crokin said in the video. If JFK Jr. faked his death and was alive, it would make sense that he was Q. Adding fuel to the fire, a quote attributed to JFK Jr. in praise of Trump was widely shared by QAnon supporters on social media. Okay, I think we've had enough of that. What do you guys think about that?
I think they need to hand out tinfoil hats rather than masks.
Right? I mean, so obviously none of this happened, but QAnon is still going strong, gaining membership day by day. But, you know, these crazy things that they believe aren't coming to fruition. You know, and this is a perfect example. Just one of the craziest things they came up with isn't panning out. So,
and it preys upon some of their beliefs already, like the deep state, right? And you know, the belief that, and that would sound logical to them, that he went into hiding in fear of the deep state coming after him for whatever reason. And,
right.
They'll just buy right into that. Yeah, I bet that's what it is.
Yeah. I wonder if they had a backstory, like, oh, well, he didn't come out of hiding because blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Or,
Well, and then it's interesting. I wonder how this Fuchsia, this guy that they think is him, you know, in hiding, or him and
Yeah.
Yeah, how did he get connected with that?
Right.
If this guy is, if there is, really is such a guy, maybe there isn't, but if there really is such a guy, could you imagine you'd be getting calls and being hounded by Q? You know,
Yeah, you'd think. I mean, they should be pushing him pushing him to get his name on the ballot, man. Maybe they're angry with Pence because he hasn't resigned his VP, so this guy can be on the ticket.
Right.
Oh my gosh, it's. I mean, again, it just sounds so much like a religion. You know, prediction doesn't come true; it's just ignored. You know, prediction 2 doesn't come true; it's just ignored. Yeah, so it's that type of thinking that is allowing these types of so-called conspiracy theories to survive and become so popular. We just have a terrible lack of ability in the general public to discern truth from fiction.
Right.
I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. So Tracy, thanks so very much for part 3, and I look forward to part 4. So
There's a lot of stuff. There's
a ton of stuff yet. Like I said, we may need part 5. But,
I know.
So we'll see how it goes here. So we'll be right back with our crazy story of the week.
I'm feeling so hollow, don't you know? And don't you know? I'm living in shadow, don't you know? And don't you know? I fell for fool's gold, I fell for fool's gold. What did I know? What did I know? I fell for fool's gold, I fell for fool's gold. What did I know? What did I know? And you were fool's gold. Yes, I did. Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
And we're back with our crazy story of the week. Now, we covered Jerry Falwell Jr.'s and his wife's exploits with the pool boy in our last episode. But Jerry just could not help but give us the crazy story of the week. Today's story comes from the Pathos blog, Laughing in Disbelief. The story is titled, sorry, this is going to be
Just say it. Just say it.
Keep from laughing too hard here. The story is titled,
Take a deep breath.
Joseph Masturbated in the Corner 2, Falwell claims, and was authored by Andrew Hall on August 27th of this year. Jerry Falwell Jr.'s problems seem to keep multiplying. Due to accusations of him watching his wife have sex with another man, Mr. Falwell left his post at Liberty University. In an apparent attempt to justify his actions, he went on Twitter to explain the Bible is full of men masturbating in the corner.
So many of them.
While their wives had sex with other men. Now, I have read the entire Bible. I don't recall seeing any of that, but I mean, Falwell's the expert. In more ways than one. Look, what do you think Joseph did when God impregnated Mary, the mother of God? He watched. He watched in the corner and wanked off. That was his calling. God called him to do that, tweeted Jerry Falwell Jr.
Oh, God.
Now,
Praise Jesus.
biblical scholars admit there is nothing written in the Bible saying Joseph did not masturbate in the corner. Mary had sexy time with the Almighty. Many believe this theological question will haunt Christian colleges and universities for millennia to come. That's COME, by the way. Jesus of Nazareth did speak about being present when the Falwells kinked it up. This is what he had to say. The Son of God admits he wanted to look away during each and every sexual encounter between Becky Falwell and the man she described as El Grando.
What?
El Grando.
Rondo?
Grando. El
Big.
Grando. Big.
Huge.
Rondo.
Grando. Right. However, he just could not. It's part of my job to be everywhere and know everything, but I swear to me, this was worse than the crucifixion. I have been talking to my therapist for years about this. I have PTSD from Jerry Falwell Jr. masturbating in a corner, Jesus admitted. Jesus refuses to comment on what happened when he was conceived. It is just one of the incidences he prefers not to remember. Evangelical Christians are jumping on this hot new trend of cuckolds. I had to look that word up. Cuckolds means men whose wives are unfaithful. Husbands unable to pleasure their wives confess they are thankful for someone else to do the job while they are totally not looking at gay sex on Pornhub.
Totally not.
Thus endeth the crazy story of the week.
Let's do it again. Do it again. Do it again.
Well, they did. They did do it again. Quite often, it sounds like.
Do it again. Do it again.
I mean,
Encore.
we think Trump goes crazy with Twitter. Can you imagine posting that on Twitter?
Was he off his medication or on some medication when he did that?
Oh, I think he's just off.
Just, yeah. Yes. He got off quite a bit, it sounded like.
Oh, wow. That's something that had to be read to be believed, but those of you that don't believe me, you are welcome to look it up on Twitter, because I did take a look, and sure enough, Falwell posted that.
I hope it's still there. I'm
It just
really
adds to the crazy 2020 and all the crazy stuff coming out this year. It's just one more crazy thing.
Yeah, but the good part is we get a good hard laugh out of it. So, and hopefully our listeners do too. Well, that will wrap us up for this week. If you have enjoyed our program, please pass the word to your friends and associates, believers and non-believers alike. Again, just a reminder that you are welcome to post questions and comments on our Facebook page. Remember, there is a big difference between having good reasons for what one accepts to be true and having bad ones. Incidentally, this is the only distinction one needs to become a strict atheist. This has been Dr. Brad for Tracy and Tim saying so long.
Right.